I wanted to show a little trick on how to get a pocket centered when you don't have a reference plane in the middle and you can't necessarily easily, at least apparently at the beginning, show or utilize a symmetry constraint. So I've got a model started, and I want to open up and also a sketch started. I want to open up the sketch and notice how, get rid of that for a moment, and notice how I've got a pocket started, and my intent is to get the sketch centered, and this is, by the way, the overall pad is 4 inches, so this is 2 inches. I got 3.5 going this way, and so I want 1 inch here and 1 inch here, but without throwing in a 1 inch parameter. So I don't want a 1 inch parameter because I always want to keep the pocket centered. So if I put in a 1 inch parameter, I guess I could tie that in with relations, but my intent is for the pocket to always be centered. So I want this to be 2 and I want this to be 4. So if I were to change the dimension, the base dimension to, let's say, 5 instead of 4, then this pocket always stays centered. So if I were to put in a 1 inch, an explicit 1 inch dimension here or 1 inch dimension here, then I'd have to also change that. So my intent is to create a pocket that's going to be centered at all times. So CATIA used to be able to do this fairly easily. I noticed some changes in the latest release of CATIA. Hopefully it's a bug and they're going to fix it, but some issues going constraints to an edge. So I'm going to start off here, and I'm just going to do a project 3D element as construction geometry on these edges, just so I've got a very intentional edge here versus a topological edge. So I'm going to do project 3D element. I'm going to make sure construction is turned on. I can select there and there, and that turned that into a construction element, a very intentional construction element versus a topological edge. I'm also going to throw in an axis of symmetry as a construction line. So this would probably work with an axis as well, but I want to show it with a construction line. Go to wireframe so you can see this a little bit better. So I've got a construction line going vertical here. It's got a lot of degrees of freedom from motion. I got a construction line here at the end, a construction line here at the end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this centered by using a symmetry constraint. Now we're used to doing symmetry constraints by making two entities symmetrical around an axis, but you can also make an axis centered between two entities. Same process. It's a 3 selection process with the axis of center being the 3rd selection. I'm going to go 3D here so I can see this a little better and go back to shaded mode. So there is So there is one entity, there's another entity, so do a pre-select with a control key there and a control key there. So it's a 3 entity selection, 1, 2, and then the axis of symmetry 3. And then when I go to symmetry constraint, it throws that in the middle. So if I look at this from the top, this is now centered between this edge and this edge, which is great. Now what I can do there is throw in a more traditional symmetry constraint by going there, there, and then axis of symmetry 3rd, put in my symmetry constraint, and now that pocket stays centered. And regardless of, I probably don't have to close it up, but I like to do it anyway, but regardless of how wide the object is, that pocket stays centered. So I can create a pocket from this. Do it up to last. So I've got my pocket, it's 2 inches wide, 1 inch here, 1 inch here. But let's say if I went back and I wanted to change this to be, let's say, 5 inches, that pocket stays centered. Now there are better ways to do this and other ways to do this. Specifically, if I were to put this in the center, put a reference plane in the center. Now mirrored extent would have given me 2 inches and 2 inches when I had the original 4. I wanted a very intentional 4 inch dimension. Change this back to 4. So I did a 1 direction extrusion, and then I centered the pocket up to capture that design intent. I hope this helps.